So, for those who don't know, J.K. Rowling has a trans friend. Now, like anybody who has a black friend and still manages to do a racism, it's not quite enough to just have a friend who is trans, and it's also really weird when you start treating that one with different rules than you do for, like, the vast amount of people who happen to be trans. So, Stay Daft says, so you think people should discuss only their own rights, yet you don't believe all people, trans women, fans of Pride, should have the right to decide their own rights? Curious. And J.K. Rowling responds saying, no, I don't think all people should have the right to decide their own rights, because a pluralistic democratic society can't function that way. She's actually correct there, because, like, white people can't say they have a right to slavery, and therefore it becomes that way. But, realistically, if there's more people who want the slavery, then they do get that ability. That's one of the issues democracy has. But as a democracy fan, that is just an issue that can happen. Said, which rights are trans women and fans of Pride missing? So I'm going to go ahead and say right now that without looking further into the thread, because I've seen the end of this thread and I've seen this part of this thread, without looking further into the end of the thread, who here is guessing that J.K. Rowling is going to respond to this by using the age-old fallacious statement about people who are poor and people who are rich, and both being unable to sleep under a bridge? For those who don't know about the adage, the rule goes like this. It is equally illegal for a poor person and a rich person to sleep under this particular public access bridge. However, only one of these people will ever actually be affected by this rule. So despite the fact that it's equally illegal for both of them, it's technically a rule about only one of them. This is the difference between rules that are de jure and rules that are de facto. De jure is law as written, de facto is law in practice. How things actually manifest in the real world. The Glassfish responds, the right to simply exist is being threatened, and yet you are the head cheerleader. You are a despicable human being. Okay, cool. So when people say that trans people don't have the right to exist, it is easy to be hyperbolic and say that, oh, it's because they're being killed. Technically, not an untrue statement if we are using the strict definitions of genocide. But you're never going to win people to your side of the argument by being technically academically correct about a thing if they don't feel about it in their, like, vibe-coded heart of hearts. So when you say right to simply exist, it's easy to extrapolate that from, well, you're allowed to exist, you exist right now. But what people usually mean by that is that trans people don't have a right to exist the same way cis people do. So cis people generally have the right to go to a bathroom without being harassed. That is a thing that I can do as a cis guy going into a men's restroom, a men's washroom, a men's locker room without too much issue. A trans woman, if they don't pass properly, according to society standards, will not enjoy that same right. They will be kicked out of bathrooms. They will be kicked out of several areas simply for trying to exist there as they understand. Now, what's funny is if any of you are familiar with Yuko, she's a trans YouTuber that covers her experiences and skits and all kinds of stuff using a VR chat avatar. VTuber, effectively. So she had a video recently talking about her bottom surgery, and one of the things that happened after she got bottom surgery is she tried to go and use the washroom. She used the washroom for men because she thought that that would be the one that would cause her fewest issues, but because she passed, she got harassed for being a trans woman in the men's restroom of all things. This whole shit is wild to me, but that's the kind of thing trans people are talking about. They're talking about their right to exist. They don't get to exist in the spaces that they feel comfortable in, and then they make decisions based on that, and then those turn out to also be the wrong decision. So I guess the decision is never shit outside in public, in any place that anybody else is allowed to shit. It can also further expand into, like, their right to exist as their authentic selves. That gets stripped away when people do things like limit their access to HRT or surgeries. But, okay, Could you define exist for me in this context? Trans people exist, trans women or women, when you tell them which bathroom to use. Hey! Not based on how the reality of their gender, but on a checkbox of their birth certificate, you deny their existence. Your version is they exist, but, and that is the path to annihilation. So, technically you're not wrong, but again, this rhetoric right here, it does not pull people over to your side. Now, granted, you're never going to pull J.K. Rowling to your side. Ever, 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 ever. That's not going to happen. She's a transphobic bigot, and she's going to stay that way forever. I don't see her changing ever. Neato, that's how things are. But, again, despite the fact that the definition of genocide, strictly given, we are several steps into that in regards to trans people, and that is backed up by warning lights being thrown out about the United States from the Lemkin Institute. But you're never gonna convince a random fucking normie out in the world that matters, which is terrifying and sad and stupid, but I digress. She says, yes, the people who call... Oh, boy. Yes, the people who call themselves trans exist, and they deserve exactly the same rights as everyone else, which fortunately they already have in the UK. Okay, again, she did it. She did it, everybody. She did it. She did the rich and poor people both have the same right to not be under a bridge shit. She did it. That's exactly what that is. It would be considered discrimination if a person was refused employment, housing, or the vote because they identified as trans. Trans women are women is a thought-terminating cliche. Men are not women. That does not mean they're not allowed to present themselves however they like, call themselves whatever they like, and believe whatever they like about themselves. It means they haven't changed sex. It's not a thought-terminating cliche, though. It's just an evidence-based statement. If we are using the term woman as a gendered term, then we are talking about somebody's internal identity of themselves. So trans woman or woman is a true statement based on that and that alone. Now, you can add as many modifiers as you want there, but then we get into another fallacious argument, which is called the argument from the heap. If you've never heard of the argument from the heap, the argument from the heap is this. You have two piles of straw. One pile of straw is an ounce big. Another pile of straw is a kilogram big. One of these piles is considered a heap. At what point did the small pile, if you add straw to it, does it transition from a pile to a heap? The answer is, there is no fucking answer. This is the same type of thought experiment as Ship of Theseus. What is the Ship of Theseus after you've removed so many boards and swapped them out for another one? Where does the identity lay? Who cares? Wittgenstein was weird. The answer for the exact moment when one person transitions from one area to the other is a largely useless idea, because it is an argument from the heap. At what point the pile became the heap, I don't fucking know. But at some point, we can point to a pile and say that's a heap of straw. At what point you consider the transition to be enough for you in regards to trans women, I don't know. But I can point to somebody's identity and say that's enough for me. So the pile of Theseus, yep. Okay, cool. She's doing an argument from the heap. If we replace the objective observable characteristic of sex with the unfalsifiable concept of gender identity, women and girls lose, among other things, the right to fair and safe sports with women-only spaces, including changing rooms, prison cells, and rape crisis services. I'm so glad she brought up rape crisis services, because it turns out that trans women are very, very likely to be raped if you do things like put them in men's prisons. You're worried about prison cells? Well, statistics bear out that, especially because of V-coding, trans women tend to get raped more in those areas. Talking about rape crisis services, they tend to get raped a lot too. So, I'm sorry, but I don't care about any of this. I don't. I can't. Because none of these are good arguments. Not a one of them. Women and girls are provably more vulnerable to forms of abuse, including sexual assault, harassment, and voyeurism in mixed-sex spaces. There is no evidence that trans-identified men don't have exactly the same rates of criminal offendings as all other men. Okay, so you mean trans women, and bear in mind, men and women both are capable of rape, first of all. Secondly, in terms of amount of abuse, I'm glad you care about those numbers, Joanne. If you cared about those numbers, then you would care about the numbers that talk about what happens to trans women when they get V-coded in prisons. If you care about those numbers, if you want to bring them into the argument, then we get to bring all of the arguments in regards to those numbers together all at once. Easy. Simple as that. Said trans people exist. I have no desire for them not to exist. Right, but you care that they don't have access to the bridge. I wish them safety, happiness, and health. However, existence does not and should not mean the violation of other people's rights to privacy, dignity, and freedom of speech. Rights to privacy, you say? So if a trans woman goes into a bathroom and takes a fucking shit, she has a right to privacy there, right? Sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I'm glad we're on the same page, except I know we're not on the same page. Because we would never be on the same page about this. Because Joanne does not think that way. Joanne thinks exclusively in terms of what can benefit her arguments in her specific Christmasland version of feminism. Then she says, why is it that you used to feel trans women were women? In your article in 2020, you referred to your transsexual friend as she and said you found it hard to think of her as anything other than a woman. Is that no longer the case? And she says nothing's changed. Joanne! Friend, pal, asshole, dambus, dungass. You can't apply something like that uniquely to one person and then not extend it to the others. Boy, howdy, you have a black friend. They're one of the good ones. What qualities made them one of the good ones? Oh, you say that they act like everybody else, like a normal fucking human being? That's weird, almost like that's everyone. Nothing's changed. I was being honest about how I feel about an individual trans woman I know who was a gay man pre-transition and who I met for the first time post-transition. Objectively speaking, she has the physical characteristics that make it fairly obvious she wasn't born female, but she's a gentle, funny person, and I've never referred to her as anything other than she and her. Joanne, that's so weird that you could not apply that standard to everybody. That's so strange. Anyway, a lot of racist people have one black token friend. Tokens get spent. I find it perfectly easy to reconcile my fond feelings towards her and my experience of her as someone with very female-coded energy with a belief that she hasn't literally changed sex, and incidentally, she doesn't believe she's literally changed sex either. The argument isn't that they literally changed sex, though. Technically, Joanne, there is an argument to be made about what we use to determine sex characteristics, given that we have phenotypical expression, gonadal expression, we have genitalia expression, gametal expression, hormonal expression, chromosomal expression, and which one of these we specifically use to determine sex depends on the fucking decade. I promise you, it's really weird. Go watch Sex and Sensibilities. We've changed our definitions on this a lot over the years. It happens a lot in science. So I say we, I'm not a scientist. So, Joanne, nobody's saying that they changed their gametal sex. Until, like, the moment where we can, because, you know, science does this cool thing where we find new shit out and we progress. And we've also done research so far into how to get, say, a womb into a trans woman. That's a thing that we've done research into as a species. So, like, once somebody is given birth, as far as I'm concerned, they're way past the point of womanhood. But then again, that's really reductionist because it makes it to where we only view women as fucking breeding machines. I digress. Point is, irrespective of your views on sex, which I promise you, none of them really matter because you're not a biologist. Joanne is not a biologist, and statistically speaking, you aren't one either. Person who's in my chat right now, who's probably going to say something about it, or who's in the, who's actually in my comment section, maybe thinking about saying something about this, you're probably not a biologist. And when a biologist does tell you you're wrong, you tend to argue with them, which I've seen. I've actually watched it happen. It's really funny. God, it's like you wouldn't argue with an electrician who's wiring your house because you would catch your house on fire, and they probably wouldn't, but you will argue with somebody who's an expert in a different field because you're even less familiar with it. It's strange. Anyway, when we're talking about trans people, 9 times out of 10, we're not talking about sex. We're talking about gender. Gender is not a term that was existed only with John Money. He coined that term as we understand it, but that concept of the social sex instead of the biological sex, that concept is far older than the word. That said, most people are younger than that word, so any weird argument about how that word should or shouldn't be applied is just a weird fucking argument because you've statistically existed your entire life in a world with that word. Anyway, it's really weird that she has a trans friend, and she's willing to treat her trans friend like a woman and call her a woman, but when it's some random other hypothetical trans person, she's gotta turn up the transphobia. Also, I think it's really weird for that trans friend to not look at the actions of J.K. Rowling and think that, maybe I am a token who's gonna be spent. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, you know I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.